What's going on, guys? James Blonde here with MMOHuts.com, bringing you another top 10 video, this time focusing on a topic that, at this day and age, should pretty much be in every MMORPG, and sadly for the most part it is not. And what that is a really good action combat system that steers clear from the traditional tab targeting combat systems of the past. Now, to be honest, as it stands with what's available in the West right now, there really isn't a large amount of MMORPGs that would have what most would consider a legitimate action combat system. A lot of games say they do, but what really is going on here is they may have a hybrid style action combat system, which still mainly consists of tab targeting, but has built-in mechanics for dodging. You're able to move while attacking, and you're able to move to dodge and kite enemy attacks, which is pretty much all the same thing. But this list is made up of games that pull off a little more than just that when it comes to the combat, and the way the combat system feels is one of the biggest factors. It's not about the game as a whole package, so to speak, especially in this case. It's more about how good it feels to crack that next skull. And first up at number 10 on the list, we have the latest MMO craze, Skyforge. Okay, so yeah, Skyforge did have us curious there for a while about its action combat system. Technically, it's not a full-fledged action combat system. Just like I mentioned a second ago, it falls under the hybrid style. There are still a lot of tab targeting elements where you lock onto your enemy and then spam your skills, but the game does have a really nice control scheme to make the combat feel more action-based for sure. You don't have the standard 1 through 8 abilities on the hotbar. You've got your right and left click abilities. The game is reticule-based, and you do have a dash-based system in place to dodge enemy attacks. So it's definitely not your traditional MMORPG stand and pray. There is some innovation there, just perhaps not as much as we were hoping for, given the reason why it's a little lower on this list. Luckily, Skyforge brings more to the table than just its combat system, and I'd say what would make the combat system in this game a little better is to have even more mobility mechanics in place, like dodges and strafes, as part of the controls. For number 9 on the list, we have Neverwinter. So here we have a very similar combat system to Skyforge. In fact, I compared the two in the Skyforge first look, but with that said, Neverwinter seems to have a bit more when it comes to mobility variety within each of its classes, something I wish was the case in Skyforge. For example, the Rogue tumbles and rolls in order to dodge, whereas the Control Wizard is capable of teleporting way out of the way in any direction. It's this sort of variation that definitely adds a level of control as well as excitement to the combat system, not to mention how quick and fluid that feels. The input commands are very fast and responsive, which is part of the reason the game has been getting a combat feels good response from the Xbox One community. That's another factor that can make a good action combat system feel well, is controller support. If it feels nice on the controller natively, then it probably has to have at least a decent action combat system in order to back that up. I can't imagine how a traditional stand and pray target system feels on a controller. It just sort of doesn't work. Now, one of the drawbacks here is in order to get that native controller support on the PC, you have to jump through some hoops, unfortunately. Plus, the combat in Neverwinter would be that much better, in my opinion, if it had some more aerial-based movements and skills. Also along these lines, we have Guild Wars 2 at number 8. So truth be told, Guild Wars 2 was originally designed with action combat in mind. Nearly every fight you encounter, you're trying to keep moving around at all times, either by kiting an enemy, adjusting your range, or using the endurance system to dodge. In fact, a good rule of thumb in this game is to follow the same 5 Ds as in the movie Dodgeball.
Dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge.
Okay, maybe that's a little too excessive, but Guild Wars 2 is way more aim and dodge based than it is stand and pray. So here we have a small amount of tells casted by the enemy's attack, letting you know when you need to dodge to make sure you're awake when playing and using the combat system in the way it was meant to be used. So over a lot of action combat systems in other MMORPGs, Guild Wars 2 is less flashy but serves a lot more tactical purpose. As sort of an evolution of that combat system, we have Wildstar at number 7. Now, Wildstar takes the combat approach a lot differently than other MMORPGs. So, just like Guild Wars 2, the game is designed around the importance to dodge and maneuver around your enemies, and pushes out a little bit further with the enemy attack mechanics. This game is filled with telegraphs, from enemies and their abilities to meteors just randomly crashing down. Everything has a telegraph. And this telegraph system gets more chaotic as you level within the game, which is supposed to make the action in the game more exciting and challenging. That was what the developers were going for anyway. So with that in mind, the developers have also incorporated several action elements into their combat system, such as freeform abilities, which allows you to tab between your enemies but still aim your abilities yourself, letting you position AoE attacks accordingly, letting you attack multiple enemies at once regardless of your class. So in this case, maximizing your DPS is heavily reliant on your positioning, and the same thing goes with dodging enemy attacks. You always got to be on your feet. If that doesn't describe some sort of action combat system, I don't know what does. The game resembles a platformer, so the controls play along with this, making the combat feel nice with the double jump ability and shift to sprint. Not to mention casting abilities offers a lot of variety from one to the next, making some of the abilities feel like abilities in, say, a game like Smite. So I'd say overall it's an interesting combat system to say the least, but it's not quite what people think of first when it comes to ideal action combat. Going in a completely different direction with this one, number 6 is Onigiri. Now with Onigiri, the combat system is really enhanced by the weapon. You can choose from 8 possible weapons in-game, and each one comes with 3 skills, and you can switch to different weapons on the fly to not only change the damage output in the various ways, but also change the way you attack with your abilities. So that's part of the reason why the game can present itself with an action combat system. It's fairly fast-paced, it's set up with a reticule system, and involves guarding, dodging, and countering your enemies. The game definitely rewards you when you successfully dodge attacks, and has a strong hit and escape mechanism that goes great with the game's ability to let players take on a much higher level boss, if in fact they feel that their skill with the combat system is on par. Truthfully, it's the combat system and similar supporting features that make this game as good as it is. Another interesting approach to combat and movement mechanics for that matter is DC Universe Online at number 5. Okay, so this one is given. I mean, you have to have an action combat system in a superhero game in my opinion. Not only is it important for the gameplay, it's a big part of the character customization and variety. The game offers so many different types of weapons, skill types, movement options, and it all ties into the combat some way or the other. And again, here we have a cross between tab target and reticule-based combat called soft targeting, but it's the overall feel of the combat itself in this game that gives it its spot on this list. The game feels fantastic on the PS4 controller, makes it feel more like a brawler game than anything when it comes down to the melee abilities. Ranged abilities not so much, but the blocking and countering mechanic in this game is great. My only complaint is that there isn't enough active dodging. It'd be great to have dodging abilities associated with the movement that you choose from the get-go, like super speed or flight. Being able to dash around or something like that just to dodge attacks would be really fun. So yeah, it's not on the same level of combat as, say, Batman Arkham Knight, for example, but for a superhero free-to-play MMORPG, it's not half bad. Number 4 on the list is Dragon Nest. Here we have a really fast-paced, brawler-style non-targeting action combat system that also feels like a 3D platformer. In Dragon Nest, the combat system focuses more around taking advantage of distance and incorporating various staggers and knockdowns to overwhelm your enemy. In boss fights, you typically need to be aware of their specials and try and counter their attacks accordingly, so dodging and strafing is extremely important. The combo system in the game also makes it enjoyable, nothing like seeing a ton of numbers build up on the screen during that epic combo, but some would say that that would also be the drawback to the game, that it's not as tactical as other games like it. So some would say it's more about the juggling and combo building over anything else, which I would think is debatable. No doubt fun though, no argument there. Continent of the Ninth Seal falls in at number 3 on the list. Now we're starting to get into the standard for what we would really like to see in an action combat game with C9. Not quite, but closer anyway. Similar to Dragon Nest, C9's combat is fast-paced, really fast-paced actually, making the combat really fun for PvP with combos and juggling present, but only on a level playing field with the overall combat strategy. So you've got a little bit of both there, juggling and being tactical. On top of that, there are some aerobatics that make the combos and skills exciting. That always helps. And yeah, this game is instance-based, even more so than Dragon Nest, but the game is definitely built around the combat system. So if that's what you're looking for, that's what you're going to get. Unfortunately, you can't get that native gamepad support with C9. You do have to configure the controls accordingly if you want to use the controller. But when it comes down to it, the action combat is so fitting in C9 that the PvP can really rely on player skill instead of the time invested in gaining new gear. That's got to speak for something. On the other side of that coin, we have Vindictus at number 2. Just like C9, the game is built around having a kick-ass combat system. This combat system is like a faster-paced version of Dark Souls combat, which is something we'd love to see in any MMORPG. And unlike C9, controller support is native and feels really fluid and responsive, especially with the control scheme, which in my opinion gives it the edge over C9 when it comes to comparing just the combat. The combat system in Vindictus emphasizes on smoothly mixing up the character's attacks while learning the attack patterns of the enemies to effectively dodge them, so combos start to become natural as they do with Dark Souls or even Arkham Knight, for example. As a comparison, C9 focuses on a hotbar full of skills, whereas Vindictus is a lot of clicking and combos. And again, here we see different combat styles based on characters, which makes it so that way you can explore a bit more to play the game differently through combat depending on what characters you pick. Realistically, it was really hard to place it below number 1 on this list, which happens to be Tera. Tera is the MMORPG that markets itself well as having true action combat, and the great part is it really does. Unlike the last few games on the list, Tera isn't instance-based, so it's already impressive having such a detailed combat system in an open-world MMORPG. There's a couple of games that do it, but the technology is just really hard to do. Not only that, but the combat fits the game perfectly. It's not too flashy, it's very tactical, it's not limiting, and the combo system that's part of the game integrates itself nicely. Plus, it has gamepad support built in, which makes its combat system feel on par with the smoothness of Vindictus. And just like a lot of the top games on this list, you have to aim, dodge, and time your attacks just right to be effective, and being tactical is not only key, but it's also rewarding. The way the combat system is set up in Tera is what allows it to offer players fun challenges when it comes to taking on big-ass monsters. Now, in a very similar sense, we've got a few games to look forward to that have epic action combat. One, you know, is Blade and Soul. A little bit of the Western version I played at E3 made me realize that it's pretty much on par with Tera, but on top of that, they have what they refer to as adaptive combat that makes your skills change as you engage your enemy differently. Or, for example, get knocked down or start a chain of combos. It definitely won't be hard for a game like Blade and Soul to become the new action combat standard, but then again, we also have Black Desert to look forward to as well. Hopefully we see more and more titles able to go this direction. Anyway guys, thanks for watching. It was fairly difficult to accurately rank the games on this list in my opinion, and there are a lot more games out there that I felt deserve attention as well. These aren't the only games that have action combat systems in some form or fashion, so I'd say think of this list as an overview of games that have good action combat systems and then take from it what you like. Let us know in the comments below what makes a good action combat system in a game in your opinion, or what your favorite action combat game is. But until next time guys, that's going to be it for me. I'm James Blonde. See you out there, gamers.